Imagine a place where the world felt quieter, where the loudest sounds were the rush of the great river and the rustling of leaves in the thick trees that lined its banks. This was the village of Atonso, a place where life moved with the flow of the waters, slow and steady, marked by the rising and setting of the sun. Homes were simple, built from mud and wood, clustered together as if seeking comfort from the vastness of the surrounding nature. The air often carried the scent of damp soil, blooming flowers, and smoky aroma of cooking fires. For generations, the people of Atonso had looked to the river not just for substance of the fish that swam in its depths and the waters that nourished their crops, but also with a deep sense of reverence. They believed that the river held a spirit, a powerful goddess who could bring life with gentle rains and destruction with raging floods. To keep their favor, they followed traditions passed down through time, always careful not to offend the mystical forces that felt all around them. In the heart of Atonso lived a family set apart, the Ekon family. Their lineage, they claimed, was touched by the divine. The eldest woman in each generation was believed to be the chosen priestess of the river goddess, the one who could hear her whispers in the wind and interpret her will in the flow of the waters. For decades, the villagers had accepted this without question. When the eldest Ekon woman spoke of the goddess's desires, her words were taken as sacred law. And what did the goddess often require according to the priestess? Offerings. Not just any offerings, but the best the village had to give. Plump chickens, strong goats, the best harvest of yam and maize, and sometimes even precious trinkets of metals or intricately woven clothes. These sacrifices, the priestess would declare with solemn authority, were essential to appease the goddess, to ensure that the river remained generous and held back its potential fury. Well, in reality, the Ekons had woven an elaborate tapestry of deceit. Generations ago, the first priestess had realized the power such a claim could hold. Tired of the endless cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting, she had concocted the story of divine connection. It was a way to escape the back-breaking labor that defined the village life and to enjoy the fruit of others' toil. The tale had been carefully nurtured and passed down through the family, each generation adding new layers of convincing detail. The villagers, bound by their deep-seated beliefs and the fear of the unknown, never questioned the Ekon's pronouncements. They worked tirelessly, their hands calloused and their backs aching, to provide the demanded sacrifices. They believed with all their hearts that these offerings were protecting their lives, their homes and their families, and their way of life. They saw the occasional good harvest or the river's calm flow as proof of the goddess's satisfaction, never suspecting the comfortable lives the Ekon's family led were directly built upon their own hard works. Meanwhile, the Ekon family lived in relative luxury. Their home was larger and better maintained than most. and they never had to lift a finger in the fields. They feasted on the village's offerings. Their bodies were nourished, while others sometimes went without. They had the largest of farms and ranches, yet they never have to do any work. The villagers nominated people amongst themselves who took pleasure in going to take care of the Ekon's farms. They wore finer clothes and adorned themselves with gifts meant for the non-existing deity. The lie had become their reality, and a comfortable existence built on the foundation of the community's faith and fear. To maintain their courage, the Ekons had become skilled performers. The priestess, with dramatic pronouncements and knowing glances, would interpret the signs, a strange bird call, an unusual ripple in the water, as messages from the goddess. The family orchestrated elaborate rituals near the riverbank, complete with rhythmic chanting, the burning of fragrant herbs, and carefully timed dramatic gestures. They even staged events to reinforce their claims. A sudden heavy rain that caused a minor overflow of the river would be presented as a direct consequence of some perceived slights to the goddess, swiftly followed by demands for more appeasements. These tales of the river goddess' blessings and punishments spread throughout Atonso, whispered in hushed tones around evening fires. They served as a constant reminder of the power of the Ekons and the importance of unquestioning obedience. The family ensured these stories were always circulating, subtly guarding the narrative and reinforcing their position. But as time passed, the younger generation of villagers grew up hearing the same stories. A seed of doubt began to sprout in the minds of a few. Among them were a group of teenage boys, Kofi, Kwabeni, Femi, and Kwame, friends who had spent countless hours exploring the forest and fishing in the river. They were quick-witted and observant, their minds not yet fully bound by the traditions that held older villagers in trail. Life in Atonso, while peaceful, could sometimes feel monotonous to them. They yearned for something more, a break from the predictable routines of their lives. It was this boredom, this quiet yearning for something to pique their interest, that first led them to question the long accepted truths about the Ekon family and the river goddess. They started small, their curiosity initially a source of amusement. They would mimic the priestess's dramatic pronouncements in hushed whispers when they were alone by the river. Chuckling at the reverence she commanded, but as they spent more time near the holy shrine, a small thatched structure the Ekons claimed was a direct link to the goddess, they began to notice things that didn't quite add up. The shrine, despite its supposed proximity to the river and the annual floods that sometimes swept through the lower parts of the village, always seemed remarkably untouched. There was never a sign of water damage, no lingering mud or debris that would surely be left behind by the significant flood. It was always pristine, almost too perfect. Then there were the priestess's predictions. She claimed to interpret the goddess's moods through the weather, foretelling periods of rain and sunshine. But the boys, who spent much more time outdoors, had noticed that her pronouncements often didn't align with the actual weather patterns. Sometimes, she would predict a dry spell when the clouds were heavy with rain, or promise sunshine when the air felt thick with humidity. These inconsistencies, small at first, began to gnaw at their young minds. They started to share their observations, their hushed conversations growing more serious. Could it be possible that the Ekons weren't as divinely connected as everyone believed? The thought was almost heretical, but the evidences they were gathering was hard to ignore. One evening, their curiosity led them closer to the Ekon's family compound than they had ever dared to venture before. They knew they were risking the wrath of the villagers if they were caught snooping. But the desire to understand the truth had become too strong to resist. They hid in the shadows of the dense foliage that surrounded the compound, their hearts pounding in their chests. From their hiding place, they could hear voices drifting from within the Ekon's main house. It sounded like an argument, the tones sharp and laced with frustration. They strained their ears, trying to make out the words. "It's getting harder to keep up," one younger voice complained. "The villagers are starting to ask more questions." Another voice, older but more authoritative, likely the priestess herself, retorted, "Nonsense. They believe what they want to believe. We just need to be more careful with the rituals." The argument continued, revealing snippets of their carefully constructed deception. The boys heard grumbling about the effort required to make the holy shrine and the complaints about the constant need to invent new demands from the goddess. They even heard one of the younger family members lamenting the fact that they couldn't openly enjoy all the offerings for fear of arousing suspicion. As the argument subsided, replaced by a tense silence, the boys decided to stay put. They had come this far. They wanted to see more. Later that night, under the cloak of darkness, they witnessed something that confirmed their growing suspicions. They saw the priestess alone in her well-lit room, enjoying a lavish meal, a feast made up entirely of the offerings the villagers had painstakingly provided. There was no divine ceremony, no communion with the goddess, just a woman indulging in a bounty of her family's deception. The sight sent a shockwave through the boys. The truth, stark and undeniable, lay bare before them. The Ekons weren't divine messengers. They were simply clever manipulators who had exploited the faith and fear of their community for generations. The anger that began to simmer within them was mixed with a sense of responsibility. They knew they couldn't keep this discovery to themselves. The villagers deserved to know the truth. Driven by their newfound knowledge and a sense of righteous indignation, the boys began to hatch a plan. They knew that simply telling the villagers what they had seen and heard might not be enough. The Ekons had woven their lies so deeply into the fabric of Atonso's tradition, and so many would likely dismiss their claims as youthful fantasy or even blasphemy. They needed proof, something undeniable that would shatter the illusion once and for all. The next village gathering was approaching, a time when the community came together for celebrations, important announcements, and, of course, the largest pronouncement from the priestess regarding the river goddess way. The boys decided this would be their moment. They spent the next few days in secret, meticulously planning their move and gathering the simple materials they would need. When the day of the gathering arrived, the air was thick with anticipation. The villagers, dressed in their finest clothes, gathered in the central clearing. The Ekon's family arrived in procession. The priestess carried on a simple palanquin, her expression serene and authoritative. She began her usual address, speaking of the goddess's continued favor and the need for upcoming sacrifices to ensure a bountiful harvest. As she spoke, the boys moved into position. They had chosen a moment when the priestess was describing a particular elaborating ritual. She claimed the goddess had recently revealed to her a ritual involving specific chants, gestures, and the placement of offerings in a particular pattern near the river bank. Just as the priestess reached out the climax of her description, the boy stepped forward. Kofi, the most outspoken of the group, addressed the crowd. His voice surprisingly steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. Respected elders and fellow villagers, he began. We have something to show you. Confusion ripped through the crowd. The priestess frowned, her eyes narrowing. What is the meaning of this interruption? She demanded, her voice sharp. Ignoring her, the boys proceeded with their plan. They began to recreate the very ritual the priestess had just described. Their movements precise, and their voices mimicking the chants they had overheard the Ekon's family practicing. But there was a crucial difference. As they placed the offerings, simple stones and leaves they had gathered, they revealed how easily the ritual could be staged. How the seemingly mystical gestures were nothing more than carefully choreographed movements. They showed how the sacred patterns in the sand could be created with a hidden stick. How the divine whispers could be initiated with clever dummy talk. With each step, the illusion of the Ekons had so carefully cultivated began to crumble. A murmur spread through the crowd as the villagers watched the boys' demonstration. Doubt flickered in their eyes, replacing the unusual, unquestionable beliefs. Some of the older villagers scoffed, unwilling to accept the possibility of such a long-standing deception. But the younger ones, who had perhaps harbored their own quiet questions over the years, watched with grounding understanding. The priestess tried to remain in control. her voice raising in the indignation. "These boys are blasphemers. They are trying to undermine the sacred traditions that have protected us for generations." But her words no longer held the same weight. The boys' simple demonstration had planted a seed of doubt that was quickly taking root. People began to whisper among themselves, pointing out the inconsistencies they had perhaps subconsciously noticed over the years. The pristine shrine, the inaccurate weather predictions, the Ekon's seemingly endless supply of food and wealth, it all began to fall into place. Seeing the tide turning against her, the priestess' composure finally broke. Her face contorted with anger and fear as the villagers turned their gaze upon her. Their expressions a mixture of shock, betrayal and dawning realization. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Generations of unquestioning faith had been shattered in a single moment. The villagers felt a profound sense of betrayal. The weight of their tireless sacrifices suddenly feeling foolish and unnecessary. A low rumble of anger began to rise from the crowd, directed squarely at the Ekon's family. Cornered and exposed, the priestess and her family could offer no real explanation, only weak denials and desperate attempts to cling to their crumbling facade. But the evidence was too clear. The villagers' delusionment too deep. The mob surged forward, their anger threatening to boil over. The carefully constructed word of Atonso had been irrevocably changed. The villagers had to confront the reality to their blind faiths. The years of hard work and sacrifice had only served to enrich a deceitful family. And the Ekons, stripped of their power and facing the wrath of the community they had long exploited, had to reckon with the consequences of their generation-long lie. The river still flowed, the sun still rose and set, but the life in Atonso would never be the same again. The truth, once revealed, had a power of its own, washing away the lies and forcing everyone to see the world with new, clear eyes. Before dawn, the entire family of Ekon was nowhere to be found. The community youth stormed their house and razed it to the ground. They escaped with all the valuables, leaving behind rags and empty houses and fake shrine. Legend have it that the Ekon's family was never seen nor ever again valued in the village, and their story was told to generations to come, how the full community was deceived for decades by just one family.